Hello, everybody. So I'm going to set context in the video after I just give a couple of announcements. So a few things. If you're interested in working with me one-on-one, go ahead and email me. My email's below. The Circling Institute, my company, who teaches and leads circling and the circling method. We have, with the coronavirus, has had us bring everything online. So all the courses that I'm teaching right now are all online. And we'll probably be doing a lot more online ongoingly in the future, no matter what happens with the coronavirus, along with in person. So that link is below. Okay, so this video I'm really excited about, and there's a number of different contexts that you could be listening to this video through. So it's a video with John Vervaeke and I, and it's on one level, I wanted to talk with him to start to really hone in on these distinctions and these ideas that we have been, in many respects, been talking about for the last 8 months or so. A lot of those conversations are amongst my videos. And in preparation for the Stoa circling event that I'm doing on Peter Lindbergh's platform, I will put a link on how to RSVP to that. That's going to be happening tomorrow, Tuesday, at I think it's 4 p.m. 4 to 6 p.m. California time. And it was, I think, about 80 RSVP'd. We're going to cap it at 100. And what it's going to be is what is coming to me as, right, is really gathering the notion of what I've been doing in developing and circling for, since the early 90s, and linking it to the notion of Dialogos. So John's going to be on that with me. Chris is going to be on that with me. Hopefully, if Jordan Hall is available, hopefully he'll attend too. And what we're going to do is it'll be the first time of formally, as an experiment, having all of us enact this process and finding the right constraints and the right way to transition from one into the other and back and forth. So this dialogue that we're having is really getting clear on some of those notions. And of course, it turned into Dialogos, and it led to all these other things. There's a certain moment where John was like, I got it. This is what I've been trying to say. Exemplifying everything that we were talking about. So beautiful. I can't believe my life. I have to pinch myself sometimes. So you can also watch this as a preparation for that, and to get more of a conceptual sense of it, because this session is going to be mostly very little lecture, just enough to get us oriented for us to experiment and discover together. So thank you for joining, and see you soon. Computer, there we go. So this is the first time just you and I have met in a few months.
Yeah, we've always been meeting with either with Chris or with Jordan.
Yeah,
yeah, that's true.
It's good to see you. On another level, it's like, although you and I personally haven't, just the two of us haven't met. I mean, I just see you on so many different videos, talking to so many different people, but it's like there's just a familiarity. Just from being in this space together, but also just seeing your face just pop up on my internet all the time and watching these videos.
And also you tweet me about these amazing books like you did this morning, and like I can't keep buying all these books, but you tweeted me about that excellent book. I'm going to probably track that down. It looks fantastic.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I'm doing lots of videos because I'm doing the voices with Vervaeke, as well as still trying to release sort of the lecture styles when I can. And also I'm doing the live streaming of the meditation class every morning now too. And so
What's that? Actually, what's that been like for you? I've been enjoying those a lot.
So it's been very helpful to me
Mm-hmm.
because I'm getting a lot of encouraging feedback from people, because it's giving me a sense, doing a lot of the videos, especially around the COVID and sort of existential and philosophical responses to them, and then doing the meditation videos with people has really given me a sense of trying to do something to help and to intervene. And like, obviously nothing comparable to what the healthcare workers are doing. I'm not trying to make that comparison, but the fact that I can perhaps help people address the meaning aspects of this and the existential aspects of it and the cognitive aspects, that's been helpful to me, because it's reduced my sense of just sort of being, of just passively suffering the crisis. It's allowed me to connect with people. What's really interesting is like there's a community now forming. All the people that come on actually online, and they're all there, and they're often now talking to each other way before the class starts, and things like that. And so that's been really, really wonderful. And I'm actually happy to get the series out there, because now it'll be, long-standing. And finally, especially for today, for example, although this has been a pattern across. So I was teaching about meta contemplation today, and it sort of all came together in a powerful way. And I've taught this course many, many, many times in person, but there was something about doing it in this context that made me sharpen things up, I think, a little bit more. Those are all the tremendous positives, and they keep me going. The negative has been that it sort of brought back up sort of the fears of social exposure, and those were exacerbated, and it's hard to say all chicken and egg kind of thing, but the fact that my ears been really bad, the Meniere's, and so that's actually making it sort of physically difficult to sit. But so many people found it, and this again I'm so grateful for this. So many people found it helpful to see me doing what I can, even in distress, to keep, doing the practice, where, and trying to properly befriend myself. They found that very, very helpful. And then that in turn was encouraging and helpful to me to keep going. So in fact, what we've done is we've extended it. We were doing 2 teaching sessions per week, and that would have been a 5-week course. We decided to slow it down so people could catch up and get more practice in, and we're doing 1 teaching per week, and now for a 10-week course. So that's where that's at. But it's been very good. I don't want to say fun, because it's been very challenging in a lot of ways, but it's also been really good, really meaningful.
Right. What you said about, it's interesting, because this video, part of what I want to do with just recording this is just offer it to the people who are going to attend to the Stoa to watch before and after.
Yeah.
Because the Stoa, just to set some context for that, this is, and it's funny because I'm watching it come together in me, right? When we asked to do this, and Peter Limberg, said, "Hey, come and put like a 1-sentence descriptor." And I said something about come circle the meta crisis, where we enter into authenticity, into dialogos, right? In other words,
right,
make this transition, right, from what's traditionally what a lot of people traditionally think about as circling, this intersubjective kind of meditation, into it going into dialogos, right? Transforming each other. And so since I wrote that, it's almost been as if that was like an attractor basin for all the conversations that we've been having.
Very much.
And this is what I'm imagining, and this is often my experience actually in teaching, is I think what you just mentioned about the meditation. So I often find this when I'm teaching a course, where what I've been thinking about with a person or a student or a lecture that I'm giving or making a distinction where everything I was thinking about just comes together and
Yeah. Yeah.
elucidates in that moment.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, that's very much the case. I've noted that too, how we're sort of happy with carrying things around in our head in a somewhat fragmented, vague fashion. But when we have to enter into a genuine discourse or dialogue, or perhaps even dialogos with people, that is no longer acceptable. It alters your perspectival standard, right? And it becomes much more demanding. And I think that's really, really cool. That's one of the great pleasures of teaching.
Yeah.
In fact, if that's happening for you, and you can share that moment of learning when you're teaching, that's better than just the dissemination of information to people, I find.
Yeah, totally. My wife just reminded me to keep it down. I get excited, and then the neighbors. We just moved into it. We just bought a new place, and it has a thin wall. So,
oh, I see.
I've been getting complaints from the neighbors. I should just blame you instead.
That's fine.
A little shh right here. So this is, in this, you're going to be there. Chris is going to be there. I'm trying to get Jordan there. And the way I'm picturing it, and I'm working this out, is doing a progressive series of exercises that kind of get people into that space and see if you can evoke that transition.
Sure.
And these transition points, which I think are going to be essential. And what's really interesting is that it's going to really call on people's agency and their sovereignty to really do this, because some of these things take a lot of practice to learn, right? And so a lot of tolerance for what I'm going to call fumble fucking, right? And experimentation. So I'm really looking forward to setting the context for that and design in the middle of designing the exercises. And I was thinking it would be great if the four of us could get together and just do like a demo at different things and go through all the exercises and then demo something and have them go and break up into groups and do it and then come back together and talk about it and have it explicate the very thing that we're attempting to create.
Yeah. Well, I'm very interested in this. Peter Lindbergh and I have been working on trying to figure out the right sort of constellation, the right, what I call pedagogical program, the right sequencing and feedback relationships between these various practices to try and, get the best pedagogical progression through them. So we need a lot more of this online stuff where we're testing things out. As long as people understand that this is very much a work in progress and experimental, I think it should be very good.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually, this will be kind of a little different. We'll see, right? But it'll be a little different of a dialogue for both of you and I, because I have some specific questions.
Yes.
Right.
Excellent questions.
Yeah, totally. That are actually have come out of our conversations and have deepened.
Yep.
I've been noting them as I've been taking lots of walks lately to get out of the house. They come up to it while I'm walking, and so I had to make a little note of them. But one of them that has been very striking to me, and I really share this with you, is this sense of what you, I believe it was actually in our last one-on-one dialogue where you had said something to the likes of, that philosophia, or the practice of philosophy and dialogos, isn't just as you see it. And I think you were referencing how you've been observing and participating in other practices like meditation and circling and authenticity practice, embodiment practice. And you're basically taking one thing that's kind of missing for you in these things was dialogos and philosophia. Yeah. And in what struck me is in that conversation where it just felt deeply true, which is philosophia, or the practice of philosophy, may not just be a preferable adjunct, right, to the practices attempting to respond to the meaning crisis, but it may actually be something necessary, in the absence of which may actually be the difference between it being a genuine response to what's happening and not. And that just, I noticed for me, consolidated it for me. And that's when I was like, okay, Chris, let's read the dialogues.
Yeah. Good thing you're doing that too.
Yeah. So I'm just curious for you, like, I guess my first question is, what is the practice of philosophia, right? In Dialogos, and what is it about it that makes it something that actually is crucial or necessary, right? Along with these other practices.
So that's a really excellent question. I want to go through this really slowly and carefully because it's a question that I'm thinking a lot about, which means it's very much a work in progress for me, because I'm trying as best I can to do this double act of being deeply responsible to a reconstruction as best I can with all the help I can get of the ancient practice, while getting, staying true to these emerging existing practices. And so that's a significant challenge. So the thing for me that what philosophia is, and I use that term because I'm not talking about what's traditionally, traditionally is the wrong word, what's currently for a long time, since perhaps the Enlightenment, right, understood by philosophy. So let's call that academic philosophy. And I want to state right up front that I believe in, and I think academic philosophy is important. Okay, it really is, and I have a PhD in it and stuff like that. And so I'm not, but there's a sense in which I understand how that specialist task is not sought after and may not even be needed by most people. But I think philosophia is. Because philosophia is the task of bringing various strategies of rational reflection. And I want to ask people to give me charity here, because I've done a lot of work trying to expand the notion of rationality and expand the notion of knowing beyond logical manipulation of propositions and beyond just propositional knowing. So I'm using both knowing and reflecting and understanding and rationality in a much more comprehensive sense. So for me, meditation, as you mentioned earlier, is an importantly rational activity, because it systematically and reliably reduces self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior within our attentional processing.
Yeah.
So philosophia is an attempt to bring rational reflection and enhanced understanding to, right, our processing in a powerful way. And so what I saw happening was, what I see happening in these practices is there's a lot of what I would call, interactive reflection. People are reflecting on the interaction, and they're reflecting on their sort of state of mind, and that's good, right? But it's not put in the service of trying to bring about a reflective enhancement of our understanding of the processes of meaning making. So one of the things, like, for example, what's happening in the four-way Dialogos with you and I and Chris and Jordan is we don't just circle, we also do something. So we do this really important move, right? There's a phenomena that emerges, let's call it in the circling aspect, this collective flow state. And we know when we're in it because we can all feel the jazz happening, right? Yeah. We get that collective flow state. But then what will happen is that phenomena, instead of being something that we're immersed in order to engender the flow, one of us will often step back and we will question it. Now, not in the mere curiosity sense of, wow, what's that, right? This is more in the wonder sense. It's like, what is that? What is that disclosing? What is that exemplifying about this process that I care so much about? What way of life is it portending? What kind of person is it affording me to aspire to becoming, right? And this is what philosophia was about, trying to get an understanding of, what possibilities are available to us, aspirational possibilities, the ontological possibilities of how we can relate to ourselves, to other people, to being in general. And you don't have to be like, it helps, but you don't have to be like versed in technical philosophy to do this. Because obviously it started with people like Socrates who weren't that technically versed because there just wasn't that much around, right? And so the idea here is, can we get to a place where, and this is this really sweet spot where I'm staying in touch with the online organic flow of the phenomena of logos, of meaning making taking on a life of its own. But can I also let it tutor me? Can I let it educate me? Can I let it draw out for me a reflective understanding? And we have to be, and notice what we do. We sort of challenge each other, and we question, and we build, and we elucidate, we go back, right? Because we're not being satisfied now with any quick, intuitive, oh, well, that's just that. Intuitive understanding, right? Nor with some merely technical labeling. You see in the Socratic dialogues that Socrates is always trying to steer between these two options we have for premature closure.
Yeah.
That's why I often say the questioning that we're doing is more like questing. We're not trying, right, to close off the phenomena. Instead, the reflective understanding is trying to correct ways we might be self-deceptive, premature, misframing it, so that we can actually open it up for more disclosure. So we're going back and forth between the phenomena in flow, right, and then the theoretical reflection, and we're trying to keep them really resonant in sync with each other. So that's what I mean by, it's not just argumentation. Argumentation in all of its senses is there, but it's also exemplification, right? And so we're trying in philosophia to disclose not just ways of thinking, but ways of being, and make them aspirationally attractive to people. That's what I mean by philosophia. And why is that needed? Well, why is that needed? Because this is the place, this is the philosophia in Dialogos, I think is what Jordan Hall, and he seems to be in agreement with this because he keeps meeting with us, right, and keeps talking with me too, was needed, which was a meta psychotechnology. In addition to all of these practices, we need a meta practice that is designed to curate and vet and cultivate the individual ecology practice. This is the place where we tap into the deepest resources simultaneously of individual cognition and distributed cognition, and we ratchet it up as much as we can: individual rationality, collective rationality, individual wisdom, collective wisdom, so we get the best wisdom we can have for the ecology of practices. And I think that's why it's indispensable.
Totally. As you're talking about this, I was flashing to, so for example, one of the things that has happened for me in dialoguing with you is, you bring debate. If you ask a question, for example, right, you've asked me questions before in those dialogoses that is a struggle for me to answer, right? So you ask me a question, and it's as if in answering it, right, I'm walking towards the answer of it. And at the end, I may or may not have answered it, but because you bring to bear all of your like the horizons of being a scientist, a philosopher, of all the different things that are probably just implicit for you in that point. And I've never really been around anybody that brings to bear all those things, right? In answering those questions, I'll get at the end, and I may not have answered the question, but then I'll look up, and what the horizons, right, is like I'm in you draw me into a valley, and then I look up and I'm now in different meaning horizons, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then those horizons I look around at, and things occur, the very same things occur differently to me. And there's that sense in which there is really that sense in which we're all kind of traveling together, and that there's something guiding the inquiry that
Yes.
somehow doesn't, because of the sense of flow, there's an absorption into it. And then at some point, I think what you're talking about, somebody steps back and goes, what is this thing that's going on right here? How did you notice that? Right.
Exactly. So that, yeah, I mean, I'm sort of thinking about that as giving voice to the logos, right? Rather than, right, relying. The logos is my name for that way in which something like a dynamical system takes shape. It takes on a life of its own, and it's gathering, right? It's gathering together so things come to belong together, which is one of the original meanings of logos. But it's disclosing new intelligibility, right? But it's also a way of being. And Christianity made a huge deal about this, that Jesus didn't just speak the logos; he was the logos, right? And so the logos is the name that Chris and I give to that phenomena. And the thing is, it has connections to logic, but it's not reducible to logic. It also has potential connections to how we organize and make use of our resources in the best way. So logos is a much more, for me, it's a way of trying to point out a dynamical system of emergent distributed cognition and its attendant emergent intelligibility. That's what logos is. It's right. It's that when that Chris and I call it the third factor, when it comes up. And then what we need to do, right, is, and I see people wanting to do this naturally in circling practices and other, they sort of want to venerate this because they sense rather directly, I think, that it's affording them, it's affording them an access to a way of being that they otherwise couldn't reach by themselves. So there's often a sense of gratitude and amazement and wonder, and like you do, how did I get here, and what was doing this, and right, and that's good, that veneration. But I want to do something more, because you this is what you see in the dialogues of Plato, right? You see Socrates is often the spokesperson for some of the way things are turning. He'll often, right, remark, and he'll often, not only will he remark on the turn, he'll try and afford the turn in various ways.
Yeah.
And so that's stepping back and naming, not just naming the logos, but noticing it in a way that explicates its call on us, that like sort of brings out how it's calling us, and then what we're trying to do is we're trying to it sounds kind of pretentious, but we're trying to directly relate to that logos so that it can afford enhanced understanding.
Yeah.
And again, in not just intellectual understanding, in all the kinds of knowing.
Yeah, like it affords insight, right?
Yeah. So Heraclitus famously said, "Don't listen to my words; listen to the logos that's speaking through them."
Yes.
Right. And so, right, and he's the great godfather of the logos idea, right, in the West. In fact, the sense of logos, that as I'm using it, is very close to Heraclitus's sense of it. And so, right, getting into a resonant relationship, not just with the others, which is what circling is excellent for, but with the emergent logos. Yeah. That's where Dialogos comes in, right? And then when that process is turned towards trying to understand the disclosure, trying to afford enhanced understanding of how we could be. I mean, that sounds like such an easy question it's an easy question to state, but it's one of the hardest questions to live through, right? How we could be, right?
Since this is like almost like revealing the divine double.
Yes, revealing the divine double, but not only our divine double, our individual divine double, the divine double potential for the group, the divine double potential for the world. It's like Corbin's notion of how all beings have their angels, right? It's right. It's that sense of it, and so when we get a sense of, like in our last dialogue, we started talking about, well, what's drawing us, like what's going on here, and we got this, and then we got this. We turned to a philosophical, not in like in just the conceptual analysis, but in the way I'm talking about here, we turn to this discussion about beauty. And then we were all doing it. We're trying to sense the beauty and keep it, like we're trying to keep coaxing the beauty into presence while also getting it, but yeah, can I coax it into presence and also let it shine into my understanding? And we're trying to help each other do that, because we're trying to bring it more and more to light, right? And so what happens is, if you notice, we'll shift from talking, we're still talking to each other, but we shift from sort of, concentrating on the communing, and we all focus on the thing. We focus on the phenomenon and how it's shining, and then we're trying to get it to shine forth more, right? And what we're doing is we're doing it really because we don't want to lose the logos, right? We don't want to lose the logos, and we don't want to lose the circle, and we're right, but we don't want to lose the opportunity either, because there's a possibility here that is very precious.
Yeah.
And so there's this almost musical finesse about that.
Yeah.
Dialectic is trying to get up a set of practices and a pedagogical program so that people learn the skills, the sensitivities, and the sensibilities in order to find and flow into Dialogos and into Philosophia in a more readily reliable fashion. And so dialectic has two aspects to it. It has a personal ontological aspect in which you're, right, basically interacting with the levels of being, because something about those levels has been disclosed to you, right? Mm-hmm. And you're also, it has the interpersonal aspect that we've been talking about. So, and you're trying to always...
An arena.
Yeah.
Relationship.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
So in a certain sense of looking at, so I'm looking at these transitions, because especially like part of my attention is like, okay, in setting up the dialectic, right, the dialogical practices, right? It seems like what's important is the transition from one into the other, right?
Yeah.
In creating the right constraints, right?
Yes.
And what's tricky about this, and I think what you're talking about is there's a delicacy to it. There's a responsiveness to it. There's a balance. It invokes all of this cool machinery, right?
Yeah. Yes.
That is very involved, yet like stands back and stands forward, and then names and is related and up. And there's all these processes that are going on.
Yeah.
And there's this element to it, which is where I think the dialogical fire, right, the symbol of the fire really comes out.
Radcliffe's symbol too, by the way.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely. That's what I really want to go, because I think on some level that's been the guiding symbol that has been speaking to me in all of this coming together. And that there's this element about a fire, right, which is similar to kind of like the garden metaphor, right, where you can get all the ingredients in, right? You can you can gather the right wood, you can stoke the flame, but there's this place where it's beyond your doing, your direct doing. You can set the stage, but then it almost by grace, by virtue of itself, it becomes more than the work that you put in.
Very much. And I think it's also pertinent, given the fact that the fire, I was suggesting to you, I think in that last dialogue, that we're engaging in virtual campfires now. Us staring at a fire that was communal, that we put together and that we're now sharing, and that is having an impact on us, drawing us out from ourselves while also drawing us deeply into ourselves. So I think the fire metaphor is also a wonderful symbol, precisely because of the way it evokes the shared campfire which is, I think, being invoked in some ways by the way this medium is affecting us. And so I think I was sort of Heideggerian here, but or maybe Tillichian. There's a coming together, a kairos, between the phenomenological affordances of this medium, what it exacts, and the symbols that you're talking about here, the fire.
Yeah, even there's this thing that you keep doing with their hands, kind of gathering. It has this quality of the gathering, but also
emergence. Yeah, the gathering and yes,
right.
And very much having a life of its own. And so you can't, like, if so you have to accept the fact that the fire is constantly shifting, constantly moving, precisely because it has a life of its own. It has, because it's a logos and not just a machine, right? You have to let it have a life of its own. This is why Jordan and I have been talking a lot about Socratic faith, this sense of, being able to maintain a continuity of contact and flow and follow with something, rather than having any kind of closure onto certainty.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, faith in this very active way.
Yes, very Socratic.
Happen. Like when you think about the letting, it's not just a passivity; it's a proactive, letting. It has me think about Gelassenheit, right? Letting be.
Yep, letting be.
Yet there's an energy. There's an energy of breakthrough. There's an energy of inspiration. It's not, right. It's both of those. It's one of the things that you talked about in one of our conversations too, that I've thought a lot about, like that. What was missing for you in some of Heidegger's later work was, it was like lots about Gelassenheit, letting be, but what was missing was another German word
from Meister Eckhart, breakthrough. The breakthrough. So you need both Gelassenheit and breakthrough. I like what you were saying earlier, like you're trying to get together the right set of constraints, a virtual engine, and that overlaps with having cultivated the resonant and appropriate virtues in oneself, right? Not just moral virtues, but cognitive virtues, so that you are resonantly aligned with the conditions. All right, because if you're not properly aligned, so you can get all the firewood together, right? But if you're not properly following the grain of the wood and paying attention to the wind and noticing the lay of the land and feeling the wetness of the wood, you can get it all together and you can use your magic sort of formula and nothing happens. But if you're finessing and finding the balance of the conditions. Oh no, these conditions have to be nudged this way. This constraint has to be nudged this way. These have to be nudged. And now, this virtual engine is possible for me, and therefore a fire is possible. That's very much what it's like for Dialogos too. I think if there's dialectic, therefore, has two sets of practices, two kinds of practices. There's the practices that you're doing to try and engender the Dialogos, but there's also all of the preparatory practices, the ascesis, the spiritual exercises that purify. I don't like that word, but that's the Neoplatonic tradition. Basically what they do is, I like Plotinus's model of, if you're carving your inner statue, they shape you and make it possible for you to enter into these kinds of practices. So I think of there being this really important relationship. The ecology of practices should shape you for Dialogos, right? So part of what the dialectic does is it helps draw from all the ecologies and draw them up to shape you for Dialogos. But what dialectic does is also it takes the Dialogos and then goes back and shapes and shepherds the ecology of practices. That's why it's indispensable
on an individual level. And this is one of the things that, this is part of one of the contentions around, I would even say, a defense and a scorn for what comes up for people oftentimes with philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Which is actually what this conversation is really like, in a certain sense, deconstructing or revealing is not a proper attitude, right? Which is in a lot of the in a lot of like the personal growth world, or like the gestalt processing world, and the you know, that whole world, there's almost like a sense of this, like the worst thing that you could be told is that you're in your head, right?
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
this kind of quality where it's almost like to be virtuous is to be shunning of anything cognitive, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think what we're addressing is that there's been a split that's gone on. I think I mean, we could talk a lot about the history of that, but like,
Yeah.
I would say in the world of personal growth today, it's generally said that like the whole thing is about getting into your body and getting out of your head.
Yeah.
And I think what we're talking about is precisely the thing that brings both of them together and then beyond themselves.
Very much. Very much. Very much. But that's why I keep saying, you know, I'm using rationality and knowing in these much
Yes.
extended sense that involve being embodied, embedded, enacted, right? All of that for ease, right? Um, so extended too, because
And
that's, I mean, the extended cognition
oh,
is
yeah,
paramount in
yeah.
circling.
And there's one of the things that you said. You said after one of our dialogos is you referred to what would happen after a dialogue with Socrates, right?
Yeah.
Where you start off with he starts off with some question, right? Like, what is some virtue? And at the end of it, like, there's no clear answer to that question. Nothing has been solved yet. People, they speak like their vision is more clear.
And they also want to travel further with Socrates, or at least they want their kids to study with Socrates.
Yes.
That's how dialogues often end, right? Yes, there's a sense of people, well, getting this Socratic faith, this sense of coming into immersion with the Logos and seeing that the Logos has a trajectory and it's offering you the serious play, and the way I use that, the serious play of another way of being. It's so I talk about the fact, you know, in other places that, you know, and people encountering this, and you know, when they're stuck and they're in need of therapy, right? They don't know how to get from who I am now in this world to that person there in that world, because that world is, right, it's not, you can't sort of infer your way to it. It's not inferentially accessible, because you don't know what it's going to be like until you're there, and you don't know who you're going to be until you're there, right? So how, and what I say, you know, and you know, L.A. Paul and Agnes Keller talk about this in various ways. Well, what do people do? Well, what we've done is we try to create symbolic places, liminal places, where we can keep touch with who we are now, but we can come into contact with who we could be and how the world could be. And that's what I mean when I say that Dialogos is very serious play. It's playing with the whole of our being, including our cognition, because if our cognition doesn't come with us along the ride, then it's going to stay back in the world and the self that we are trying to aspire from, right? I'm perplexed. I'm not perplexed in a historical sense, but it's sort of like we keep wanting to deify some aspect or some faculty and demonize some other aspect or faculty, because that way we can just sort of trust it because we've elevated it. And I'm thinking, well, I think the thing that is most deserving of your trust is your entire, this is Plato's, I think, view. What's most deserving of your trust is your entire psyche when it is properly engaged in dialectic and finds the Dialogos. Because when you sense all of your faculties coming together, logos, and then falling into the Logos, you get a kind of direct participatory trust in the course that it could take you on. You get a taste of a way of life and a way of being. That's what I keep saying when I'm saying these things are not just about giving people new beliefs or new ideas. They're serious plays in which we try to show people, you know, all humility involved, but we try to show people, this is how humans can be.
Mm-hmm.
This is how you can be.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
And so for me, trying to leave out any part of human being is to deeply misframe it. It's, I want to know who I can be, not, you know, well, your gut will. I don't want to rely on just my gut. I don't want to rely on just on my. I want to be. I don't want to just have one particular thing, you know, getting some unquestioned authority over me.
Right. And so what's interesting about this on the personal transformational end of things, right? One of the reasons why philosophia and dialogos is deeply attractive is that what it seems to do, and I've had some recent examples of working with people of watching this happen in a very concrete way, and it's fascinating to unpack with them what afforded that, right? And it's very much what we're talking about.
Yes.
There's a sense of where, you know, we may start off, like oftentimes people come to me in my personal practice, right? In my one-on-one, working with people one-on-one, and they have very specific problems, right? That they want to solve, right? And so we'll start entering into that problem, but that problem opens up to all of these things where we actually spend most of our time dialoguing around all the things that open up. And then somewhere along the line, they show up and they don't have that problem anymore. But they haven't, it's not like that they've felt like to solve the problem, right? No. In fact, the way that they organized the problem when they first came, right? It doesn't even look like the same thing.
No, exactly. Yeah.
And what's interesting is with somebody recently, I was like, okay, so what was the difference that made that difference? Because we awoke inside of it, right? From not being able to get out of bed to like running groups with people and taking the leadership in her community and like she's no longer depressed and sleeping and we kind of woke up to that. And I was like, what the hell? She's like, well, what was that? She's like, well, I think what it was is in this experience, I got deeply seen. And I was like, okay, so let's pause there. Because I've heard that a lot, this experience of being deeply seen. But when we looked into it, it was fascinating. She's like, yeah, you know, when I think about our conversations, when I picture you, you're right here. Like, I don't picture you over there. I picture you right here. And I was like, okay, so let's picture that. And I'm like, is it that like are we face to face? She's like, no, actually, it's not here, it's here. And I'm like, am I looking at you, or am like, no, we're actually looking
the same way
here. And what was interesting to me is I think that this is kind of I think that exemplifies a bit of what we're talking about.
Very much. I think that's brilliant. I think that's it. That you know, it's not. It's about. It's almost like a stereoscopic thing between people. You know how the two eyes, right? They learn how to integrate, so you get a depth of vision that you didn't have before. I think what happens in this process is that. I think one of the things the Logos does is it gathers perspective so that they do that. You know, and Plotinus even has this metaphor of all these faces that come to be inward facing to the same center, and we're back to the campfire again. And that you get that fusion. And you get this sort of sense of multidimensional depth. I think that's exactly right. I think what happens when we're doing it Dialogos, as opposed to what you're doing, which is a more, I guess, therapeutic context, if that's not an insulting adjective, right? I think what's happening is the thing that's coming beside each of us is not you or me, it's the Logos.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we're starting to take the perspective of the Logos as opposed to John's perspective or Guy's perspective or Jordan's perspective. We're doing that when the circling, we're taking each other's perspectives, and we should. But what happens when you get that next transition, when that third factor appears, is you're starting to see things from the perspective of the logos, and you're starting to internalize it. It's this weird thing, because it's like, internalize it, but it's coming from us. Yeah, it's like we put all the wood together, it makes the fire, and then only then does the heat and the light come back to us, right? And then it changes us. Foucault talks about this rebound effect that we're looking for. And I think what happens is I'm starting to internalize the logos perspective, right? And that is now becoming internalized, and I'm starting to be able to see more deeply from that, because it's active with me. I think what's at the end, is it at the end of the Phaedrus? I can't, or which one is it? Where Socrates gives the prayer to Pan at the end. He said, and the idea is the gods were always here. They were always here, and they were always drawing us through this dialogue. And he basically asked Pan to make him only desire, that the good within is equal to the good without, or something like that. The beauty within, the beauty without. And I think that's very much what's going on there, is the recognition of what has been with us all the way through, is that this logos, and I like this idea we're crafting together, if it comes beside me, so I start to get this new, stereoscopic ontological depth perception as opposed to visual depth perception.
And what's interesting is this sense of, this sense of being peers. That's the thing that I really got, is like, there's that sense of like where, because there really is this experience. It's funny. I guess there is a therapeutic context, but that's not my experience. Like, it's literally like I feel we become peers, and we stand in the same place. In the way that she described it, she said it's a combination of like, you're looking at me, but then we look out together.
Yeah, there's metanoia.
Yeah. And it really is that experience of, and I think this is one of the things that circling and practicing circling has drawn, in many senses, has shown me, like gathered guysengstock on some level, because I've always noticed that this experience of deeply understanding somebody, deeply getting somebody, deeply into their world, it leads to these conversations that go beyond just the determined self or something, and it lights something up. But I understand you, and then I walk away from that knowing myself somehow better, more articulated.
Because we know ourselves in action, we know ourselves in visioning. It's not so much what we see, right? It's how we're seeing, right? And that's the whole Platonic vision, right? We even use this word still, right? It's a seeing that brings into remembrance our kinship to the divine. It's a way of seeing. It's not so much what we see, is that as we see, we realize, oh, there's a deep participatory relationship between me, right, and the divine. And so what I think that means within the Dialogos is, like you said, we get this sense of, when we get that turning and we're getting the new way of seeing that's afforded by the Logos, we then sense our deep kinship to the Logos. That's what I mean. That's it. That's the faith I'm talking about. That sense of affinity to the Logos, right? So we go, wait. That's the anamnesis. That's the remembering. That's what I really am. I'm like the Logos. I'm deeply akin to the Logos. And that gives me the true taste, the serious play of a way of being. And and it's not a foreign abstract concept to me. It's a living challenge to me right now, because wait, I'm akin to this. I participate in it. That's it. That's what I've been trying to get to. Thank you. The sense at the core of the Socratic faith is the realizing in vision, not of, but realizing in the practice of envisioning together, realizing our kinship with the Logos. It comes to stand beside us, and we see with it, and by seeing with it, we see a new way, and we realize our kinship to the Logos. And that's the serious play of faith. That serious playing and sensing of being a kin. Yes.
Yes. I just want to, I just want to sit on, I just want to be with that for a second. Especially, I think it's so, Ken, you went, that's
Yes.
it, right?
Yes.
It just
Yes.
happened.
That's what I was trying to get at with, and that sense, like, right. And that's where you have the erotic in the Platonic sense imagery and the beautification, right, of this way of life, because Plato ultimately, I'm reading Plotinus's Aeneid on beauty right now, and about this, that at the core of beauty is this deep sense of a kind of kinship, not in right in that there's a wait, we somehow belong together. When we see the beautiful thing, it calls us to a way of being that more appropriately responds to how we can belong with the beautiful thing. But it doesn't seem something. It doesn't seem. What was the terms that that Tillich used? It doesn't seem heteronomous to it. It doesn't seem like an alien nomos, an alien law or principle at work in us, right? And it doesn't seem to be just us. It isn't autonomos. He says it's theonomous. It's like there's the God. It's God-given, right? It's both ours, but it's beyond us. That's the third factor. So I don't make it, right? But it's not also something foreign to me, because kinship is something radically between, right? The affinity, the sensing of the kinship, the experience of the beauty of it, which these are all different ways of trying to put. And so part of what we're doing in the argumentation part, the way we're seriously playing with the concepts and the phenomenological descriptions and the imaginal symbols and images that Jordan, for example, is so, fecund with, right? Is we're trying to, right? We're trying to catch the fire so that it's beautiful in the sense of, I get a sense of, right? The Logos and I, right? The Logos is helping me to see my kinship to the Logos. Because of course, if there isn't a Logos in me, there is no kinship with the Logos. That's how it does that.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just really excited about this right now.
Yes. And there's that quality of what Plato talks about with all genuine knowledge is really remembering.
Yes. Yes.
Right? That sense of, there is that in that kinship of that on one level you may be seeing it for the first time, but the experience is of like, oh, it's been present the whole time. In fact, it's what's been guiding the conversation. It's what's been in the background that just came together and revealed who we are the whole time, and we remember.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And so the practicable, not just practical, but the practicable question is, well, what skills and virtues and sensibilities and sensitivities and and virtue and also shared virtues and practices can we get for people so that they can come and experience this? It's, I mean, I was remembering, see, because of my upbringing, the Bible is in me deeper than maybe my language. But I was remembering there's a passage where, I can't remember, I think it's Paul. He talks about, when you're praying, it's ultimately the Spirit is praying through you. So you're praying to God, but God is in you, like, right? Right? It reminds me of Eckhart's thing, the same eye by which we see God is the eye by which he sees me. I'm now, what I'm saying is I'm seeing all of these traditions who are trying to point to this place where we get, well, the Logos is beside or even within me, right? And yet it's affording me to see in a new way, which is a realization of my kinship to the Logos and where it's going. That's the sense of faith that I've been trying to get my finger on.
The kinship of the Logos and where it's going. Then that kinship, that remembering, that sense of that discovering we've been walking with the whole time, discovering the friend that was there, that was guiding
on the road to Erasmus.
It, in glimpsing it and then wanting it, all becomes present. Like if that's not ecstatic temporality, I don't know what is.
Well, yeah, well, it definitely is. Um, and it's interesting because I hadn't thought about that distinction in Tillich for a long time,
Yeah.
because he talks about the problem with autonomy is it closes you in. That's the Kantian Cartesian problem. And the problem with heteronomy is it's demonic, it's disruptive, it's destructive of the person. And what you're trying to get is you're trying to get the theonomy, right? That is transjective, that, right, you use, and this is the thing about the beautiful. It's what Frankfurt talks about. He calls it a voluntary necessity kind of thing, right? Where we like, we're struck and we're called, but we go, yeah, but that's what I've always wanted. I didn't know, right? Kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I hadn't thought about that, but this is a crucial feature of the state of Dialogos, that place where people are in that, it's neither autonomous nor heteronomous, right? It's theonomous, and it's because they've got that continuity of contact, that sense of it's within and it's without. They're calling to each other, but there's a deep affinity. Sorry, I keep repeating this because I'm trying.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, right. Well, I'm trying to do what we're talking about.
It's calling, right?
Yeah,
it's calling and it's present at the same time. It's here.
Yeah, exactly. We're doing what we're talking. It's here, and we're trying to make it shine forth so that we could actually see more deeply into it, right? And we're doing the theoria theorizing, right? And this is how it's different from just theorizing.
Yes.
Right. This is always theorizing that is coupled to the ongoing transformation of theoria.
Now, this brings me back to the last, like towards the end, the last question I think that I asked you about. So there's something in and I think this ties in, and this struck me. I didn't quite exactly know why it struck me, but it stuck in there in reading Alcibiades, where Socrates just referenced friendship as a god.
Yes, yes.
And I'm getting this sense because what I keep thinking about is kind of like our relationship, right? Like the biggest for me is like when I think of you, I think of friend.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And there's always like a point that you seem to make in our exchanges where you're like, how are you doing, my friend? Right?
Yeah,
and,
yes.
And there's a certain kind, there's something that word holds that is both that feels holding and disclosive of what is here and what could be here and what will be here and what has been here all at once. There's something about that when you say, how you doing, my friend?
Yes.
In something about what we're doing right now that seems very, very pertinent, this whole thing about being right here and here, being peers, and a befriending and a kinship. And one of the things I kept thinking about it is like, and on some way, how this distributes in my life. So on some level, I'll be reading things, and you know this intimately. I just did it today where I'll just be like, oh, this book. Okay. Like as if you're right there, right?
Yes.
Like there's, in other words, on some level, I saw that, and it wasn't like I was thinking about you in any particular way before. It wasn't like, but you were in some way, our friendship was something I was inside of, that when I saw that, it was just right here, right?
Yes.
I sent you that text. So there's just ways that where these things kind of, and I do feel like all these people I've been dialoguing with, I feel like I walk with them and I'm conversing with them all the time.
Very much. Yeah. I think there's the sense of, Chris and I are talking about this, the way in which there's a kind of distributed cognition. We carry around people as exemplars of ways of seeing and ways of being that are close to us. I want to riff on this, and because there's 3 associations came up right away with friendship. One is, of course, philia, which is in Philia Sophia. The kind of love we're supposed to have for wisdom is that friendship love. The primary metaphor I give people in the meditation class is that what you're trying to learn to do is befriend yourself. You're trying to learn how to come into a relationship with yourself that you try to engender with a friend.
Mm.
And then also it came to mind was Aristotle's notion that, friendship is when there's one soul in two bodies. This deep affinity, almost to the point of, interpenetration and sharing, which is why grief can be so powerful for us, because we carry the person around. And it's not like when somebody dies, right? There's also there's a way in which the world is disclosable that dies with them, and we still feel that world granting access that is particular to that person with us in us for quite a while, and it's like a terrifyingly amazing thing about how long it takes, right? How long it takes us, because of the way friendship is not just having beliefs about the person, because your beliefs are still, he was a great guy, right? It's not just having skills. There's something else, like what we're talking about here. There's a kind of mutual inhabiting of each other, like what your client was talking about, such that people represent in friendship a way of world disclosing that is indispensably bound to that particular person. This is the difference between having a buddy and having a friend, right? And people should have buddies. The buddies are people that we share entertainment with, we have fun with, and that's great, right? But a friend is somebody where we're bound, like you said, we're bound together in this way, because we see in that friendship an affinity, not only for who we are, but for who we could be, and also a way of disclosing the world that we find in some way beautiful. I like being with you because you disclose the world in a way that I find beautiful that nobody else can. And I'm attracted to that. And I want to come to inhabit or live in that as much as possible. But that's inextricably bound up with you, with you, Guy.
Right.
I can't separate. You're a living symbol. If you'll take that word as a complimentary sense, you're a living symbol of that world disclosure, and also of a potential disclosure of kinds of identity that I find beautiful, and therefore, right there, and but it's inextricably bound up with you.
Right. And this sense of it's funny. I just got this experience of like when you brought up grief, right?
Yes.
Someone dies, right? And when a friend from this percent, like a world disclosing friend in which you are drawn to in all the ways that you just said, when they die, one goes into grief. And Kierkegaard talks about this, not directly, but I think this is what he's talking about, right? When he talks about, well, what are things that can transform one's identity through and through? And he talks about unconditional commitment, but I think in a certain sense, the unconditional commitment is enacted in friendship. And so what befriending you, having a friend in this sense means is that I'm opening myself up to you dying.
Yes.
Right? And I'm opening myself up to you being a world disclosure in which I grieve. And if you let go into that grief and go through it fully, I mean, people experience that all the time where they lose a loved one or a child or something. And it completely changes all their meaning horizons, everything that gave them meaning. Right. And then if they can go through it, right, it's almost like going through the eye of the needle and a whole new world opens up and an identity after that. So there's this kind of element where I think this is one of the things that's vulnerable. Why vulnerability, intimacy, friendship, and all these things that we're talking about is basically, if I befriend you, I basically am saying that if you die, I will forever be different.
Yes, you are. And we are both doing that together. I mean, I, in fact, in my experiences of grief, what's most difficult about the grief is actually feeling that world that was accessible through that person slipping away.
Yeah.
So I find I grieve, and I hope this is understood as a compliment to I grieve the person's world so much, and that's why many people. I mean, some of the wisest advice I was ever given when I had encountered grief for the very, the most profound initial time in my life, and he had said to me, he said, "There's nothing you can do about grief other than grow into a different kind of person. There's nothing else. You try to avoid it, you try to drown it, you try and speed it. There's nothing you can do except you have to grow into another kind of person, because, right, that person is so interwoven with your world. You have to go through, you have to change the whole agent arena relationship. That is the only response." And then he said something right after that, which was the second most wisest thing. He said, I don't want to be in relationship to somebody who's never experienced grief.
Right.
Because, right? And we're going through, some people have described it, we're going through like grieving our ways of life right now, right? Because if you haven't experienced that profound grief, and this is part of what Plato talked about, is all philosophy is a preparation for death, right? If you don't go through that grief, you're not, and maybe this is Kierkegaard's point about the sickness unto death, right? Is that you're not capable of a depth. You're just not capable of a certain kind of depth. There's a story, it's a parable of the Buddha. And this woman came to him, and her son had died, and she's in deep grief. And he'll resurrect him. Now, of course, the Buddha always refused to perform miracles. In fact, he said, "This is how you know somebody's not one of my followers. They offer to perform a miracle," right? He said, but she was persistent. And so he says to her at some point, he says, okay, I'll resurrect your son. But there's one condition. You must go into the city, and you must go to a household and come back and bring a mustard seed from that household. And she goes, "Oh, that's easy." No, but that household has to never have encountered death. So she goes and she knocks on the door and she says, "Do you have mustard?" "Yes." "Has anybody here died, or have you encountered?" "Oh, yes." And then she goes to the next door, and the next door, the next door, the next door. And then she goes, "Oh." And then she goes back to the Buddha and she says, "Thank you. Now I understand." That's how he heals her, right? And notice, to bring this sort of full circle, notice how that's a dialogical process, right? She goes and talks to other people, sees other perspectives, is led out, and then something starts to take hold of her and take on a life of her own, and it attracts her attention, right? It makes her aware, and she realizes a deep kinship with other people and with her own mortality. She remembers.
Yes. And she remembers through encountering everyone living, being the face that they are, because they have experienced death, right?
Yeah.
That sense of just like the Buddha, because there's unnecessary suffering, right? Normal neurotic.
Yes, and the Buddha did a lot. He was even critical of animal sacrifice, because he saw that as unnecessary suffering, right?
Yeah.
But she, like, there's unnecessary suffering and distress and disease, and we should, of course, do everything we can, and we should try. But there's also getting human beings to, there's certain, Israel means to wrestle with God. There's certain things that all of us have to wrestle with. And once again, that's how we all have to be philosophical. Yes, I get it. You don't want to read, perhaps you don't want to read Kierkegaard, or you don't want to read Heidegger, right? Or you don't want to read Tillich. But we all need to reflect on our mortality, to reflect on grief, to reflect on beauty, to reflect on, right, being called to something other than what we currently are. These are all things that remember what I was saying, the way Iris Mertz talks about, there's a virtue of attention in that we come to realize certain things are deserving of our attention because of their beauty, because of their import, because of their realness, because of the way in which they especially disclose what it is to be a human being.
So it's like that sense of reflecting on what the philosophers reflect on in coming to philosophy, right?
Yes, yes.
Is in this story, this parable, as she came to reflect on the people and they've all died, and she became, those things reflected her back to her.
Yes.
So it's like reflect on those things that will reflect you back to you, right?
Through other people too. You remember in the symposium where I think it's with Socrates is talking about Alcibiades, how the best way to know yourself is through the image in other people's eyes of you, right? That it's through people. He doesn't just mean their, you know, their impressions.
Yeah.
He's very careful, the term that's being used here. He means that, you know, like this woman, she gets an ability to reflect on herself that's outside of her egocentric sort of like fixation, yes. Right? And notice that, you know, we should be like, it's not that her egocentric fixation is something, you know, ridiculous or vicious. Everybody, when they're in pain, becomes extremely egocentric. He takes the process of dialogue with others and getting to see through other people's eyes until they're all now, I almost picture it like now they're all standing beside her and they're all pointing to, oh, we all are mortal. And she has that sense, right, of that.
Wow. So interesting. And I was just thinking about that, just that sense of, and I was thinking about that the when you look at someone's eyes, right? Yeah. And we'll bring this to a completion soon, but like, when you look at somebody's eyes, there's one point of view where I can look at your eye and I can see my own reflection in your eyeball.
Plato's actually invoking that in the symposium, I believe.
And then there's this other way, which is, and there's another way in which I can kind of see through the reflection and see to the nothingness in the people, where it's like in a certain sense, I'm looking at the disclosure of myself, because on so many levels, I think one of the things that the people that I've called friends are the people that I've kind of ripened in their gaze.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Like, and there's like, and it's really true. Like it's usually there's that sense of being around somebody who's really wise, right? Where they can just look at you and everything. It's almost like you can feel all of your potential being animated and all the things that are other than your potential making you uncomfortable and hard to be with, but they see something through all of it that calls you. Yeah.
And that's exactly Alcibiades' discomfort in the symposium. He's how Socrates is educing. That's the original core of education. He's educing from Alcibiades because of the Dialogos, right? He's educing from Alcibiades what he could be and a way of life that he could live within. And he's turning away from it because he desires the fame and the glory.
Yeah. This is so good, John.
Yeah, I don't know if we got to all your questions, but we touched on some of them, I think.
Absolutely. Just one practical thing, just in terms of as we go forward with this. So I was thinking that I'm going to work out the outline. I'll send you the outline so we can get to the flow of it. But I was thinking at certain points we can just do a demo of these transitions, right? Enacting a kind of a transitional point in different parts. I've been working out the outline with this. But I was thinking about just in terms of, you know, if we say in the postscript of our last Dialogos, Chris and I had just a spontaneous conversation about this and exemplified and like really drew out this notion of the dialogical fire. And we kind of came to this point like, well, oh yeah, the logs are like the propositions.
Yes.
Right? And so in philosophy, there's the propositions that the philosophers make, the doctrines and all that kind of thing. And so dialogic, my sense was staying with this symbol that like engaging in the dialogue is beginning to bring these together, which is like starting to like spark it. And at some point when the logos or the fire catches, that's when it goes into dialogos, right?
I agree. I like the metaphor, especially when you think about the fact that the wood is actually stored and shaped sunshine.
Yeah.
Right?
Hermes, I can't take it anymore.
We have to, if we can get back to the way of thinking and being, the envisioning that then gets solidified in the proposition, if we can recover the light that poured in, that will also help to catch the fire.
So my thought was, you know, in looking at like through this process, right, through that symbol, what occurred to me is that the circling, right, the at this level, the intersubjective, right, of where we just have people talk about their lives, like we get each other, we go back and forth, we disclose each other, and we get that going, right? And at some point, right, we start to go, okay, what are the emerging themes that we're hearing, right? What's the thing? In that emerging things is the articulation of the wood, right? So maybe what we're hearing is something about crisis, maybe, or about meaning, or about some sense that's been guiding the conversation, that's weaving, and then and that the circling is in a certain sense gathering the wood or creating the wood, that then we take that up, right, into Dialogos, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
Okay, good.
As long as we keep tending the fire, right? So,
and that seems to be the tending of the fire. Seems to be this sense that I'm imagining will happen naturally, and we can notice it happening naturally, but we can also evoke it, which is this going up and then noticing. And this is often the sense I get with an insight. An insight is that middle spot between bottom up and top down. It's like that experience of like something comes together, it's a flash of light. It's not like a paragraph. In fact, you try to bring it, you clumsily come to terms with that flash of light, right? Right. So that sense of going up and then noticing how that affects us all personally, right? And bringing attention to there, and then looking at that, and then going up, and then coming back down, and getting.
I think that very much. I mean, and that's the Neoplatonic thing about, right, the return and then the progress, and so the back and forth. And notice how the vertical dimension comes in as we try and integrate it with the horizontal. Exactly.
This will be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It should be great.
Thank you so much, John. Thanks to you for being my friend.
Oh, thank you for being my friend. Yeah, if you could send me the file, because I'd like to upload this to my channel as well. I think it'd be cool.
I love this moment. Oh, this is it. Right. You literally did that right before you said it, right? I love that.
Yeah. It's amazing how much is carried in our gestures. Anyways, I'll see you tomorrow.
You got it.
Okay, take care, my friend. Take care.